Okay, so we are in Parshas Va'eira, that is on page 319. Parshas Va'eira, page 319, that is Shemos, chapter 6, verse 2. Begins with a very cryptic pasuk that says, Hashem said to Moshe, and Hashem spoke to Moshe and said to him, I am Hashem. I appeared to Avram, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov as Kel Shakai, but with my name Hashem, I did not make myself known to them. That I appeared to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, to the patriarchs, as Kel Shakai, but I did not make my name Hashem known to them. So what does this mean? So we know that the different names of Hashem are references to the way that Hashem is relating to the world. And Rashi says that the name Hashem is that, or the name Kel Shakai, let's say, is that Hashem makes promises, that Hashem guarantees things. But the name Hashem is when Hashem is how we refer to Hashem's relationship with the world when he's carrying out his promises. So the patriarchs were promised that the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, will be theirs and they'll live there. And that was never fulfilled. They lived there, but they were strangers in a foreign land. It wasn't controlled by them. So now Hashem is saying that to them, I was Kel Shakai, I made promises, but to you, you're going to see the fulfillment. And that's Shmi Hashem, that you're going to see my name, Hashem. You're going to see God fulfilling his promise. The Ramban, though, brings an interesting Barbanel, that the name Kel Shakai is the name of Hashem when Hashem's running the world in the framework of nature, where everything happens in a natural way, just under the control of God.
Now, there's no Kel in the Hebrew. It says, after it says Ve'el Yaakov,
El Shad, yeah. So El is right. So that's usually with those names we just say Kel.
Oh, okay.
It's just because it's the name of God, so we change it a little bit. But yeah, okay. That's the name.
Gotcha.
So that's it comes from actually die should be familiar from the Pesach Seder. We sing die Yenu, right, which means that it's enough.
Right.
And the name Shakai is really Sha die, which means that he said enough. Because die is Dayenu, it's the same word. That meaning that the world, that Hashem said enough to the world, that Hashem gave boundaries, limitations to the world, and those are the laws of nature.
Now, another real question.
Yeah.
So, we really don't say El Shaddai, that's the actual name.
Right.
We say Kel. When you're actually laning, say...
Yes, you do. So when we're laning...
So you actually do say El Shaddai.
Yes. And really the only name of Hashem we don't say when we're laning would be the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. But with that we say Adonai instead of...
Right.
Yeah, and what the academics tend to say.
Okay.
But yeah, but this we do say when we lane. Okay, so he says that the name Kel Shakai, which is how he made himself known to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, was that they lived really in the natural world, and you don't really find, at least in the Torah, overt miracles that happened with the patriarchs, that they had help from Hashem. There are midrashim with miracles, like there's a midrash that Avram was thrown in the fiery furnace and he came out alive, but that's a midrash, it's not written in the Torah. But if you just look at what's written in the Torah, you don't find unnatural occurrences happening with the patriarchs and matriarchs, other than communicating with God. Whereas Moshe was going to experience miracles, complete overturning of nature, and with the plagues, and that's the Shmi Hashem, the name Hashem, which is the name that's used to say that Hashem is the only thing that's real in the world, and everything else is a creation of Hashem. So it's completely under God's control. Okay, so continues in verse 4, Moreover, I established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their sojourning in which they sojourned. Moreover, I have heard the groan of the children of Israel, whom Egypt enslaves, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore, I say to the children of Israel, I am Hashem, and I shall take you out from under the burdens of Egypt. I shall rescue you from their service. I shall redeem you with an outstretched arm with a great judgment. In verse 7, I shall take you for a people, and I shall be a God unto you. Is me, and you shall know that I am Hashem, your God, who takes you out from under the burdens of Egypt. And I shall give you, and I shall bring you into the land which I raised my hand to give it to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So here, beginning with verse 6, where it says, I shall take you out, these are the four expressions of redemption. I shall take you out from under the burdens of Egypt. I shall rescue you from the service. I shall redeem you with an outstretched arm. That's 3. And I shall take you to me for a people. That's number 4. These are the four expressions of redemption, which is the source that we have 4 cups of wine at the Pesach Seder, each cup of wine corresponding to one of these expressions. And the Ramban explains, actually the Kliyaka, how the Kliyaka understands, that the first one is I shall take you out from under the burdens of Egypt. That's under the harsh servitude, that we're going from the most harsh downwards. So first Hashem takes us out from under the burdens of Egypt, from being from a very difficult situation of slavery. Not just a slave, because a person could be enslaved. Unfortunately, many times in our history, we were enslaved by the governments that we were under the Greeks, under the Romans especially. They were very into slaves. And a person could be a slave without any control over their destiny and having to work for their owner without being oppressed. And it's actually economically more makes sense more for a master to take good care of a slave, because they're getting stuff from them. They're getting, the healthier and more happier the slave is, the better the work for them. But so the first step is Hashem takes us out under the burdens of Egypt. Then I shall rescue you from their service, will no more be slaves. Then I shall redeem you with an outstretched arm, with a great judgment. That means that Hashem's going to take us to the land redeem us, means we won't be slaves, we won't be strangers in a strange land, we'll be in our own land. And then I shall take you to me for a people, and be a God unto you, that will be in the land of Israel, we'll have the Shekhinah, the divine presence, among us. Okay, and on page 321 in verse 9, so Moshe spoke accordingly to the children of Israel. Moshe conveyed this message to the children of Israel, but they did not heed Moshe because of shortness of breath and hard work. So they were worked so hard that they didn't have the energy even just to listen to him. And in verse 10, Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, come speak to Paro, king of Egypt, that he send the children of Israel from his land. So now tell Paro this. And Moshe spoke before Hashem, saying, behold, the children of Israel have not listened to me, so how will Paro listen to me? And I have sealed lips. He's saying, I spoke to the children of Israel who have all the incentive to listen to me. I'm telling them that they'll be freed. And they didn't listen to me. So even more so, Paro, who wants to keep them enslaved, won't listen to me. And just as an aside, the Gemara asks on this, this kind of expression we call a kal v'chomer. It's a it's a yeah, there we go. So it's a kal v'chomer. It's they call it a fiori or something like that. What's that?
A fortiori.
Fortiori, thank you. My Latin's kind of isn't what it used to be or ever was. But so that means that you could understand, you could induce something that you don't know from something that you do know. So if you know that, I tell my son Penny when I learn with him, when I learn Mishnah, I tell him that so like if your little brother could lift a 10-pound weight, so then you definitely could, because you're stronger than he is. That's a kind of understanding. And here we're saying that if the Jewish people who had all the incentive to listen to Paro, they didn't listen to me, even the more, I'm sorry, they had all the incentive to listen to me, they wouldn't listen to me. Paro, who would want to disregard what I'm saying, even the more so, he won't listen to me. The Gemara asks that the Torah says that the Jewish people didn't listen because they were so worn out by all the work that they didn't have the energy. So Paro wasn't worn out from all the work, so maybe he would listen. So that's just a question, just as an aside. This is how the Gemara thinks about this kind of induction, this kind of logic. Okay, so the Torah continues. In verse 13, Hashem sent Moshe and Aaron to talk to Paro. So now he's going to bring Aaron along to talk with him. And then in verse 14, it starts giving the lineage of the children of Israel. Begins with, these are the heads of the father's households. Talk about the families from Reuven, then the families from Shimon, and then in verse 16, the families of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, Merari, And then Gershon's sons. Then the sons of Kahas were Amram, Yitzhar, and Hebron, and Uziel on page 323. Then it gives the sons of Merari. And then in verse 20 on page 323, Amram took his aunt Yocheved, who was the daughter of Levi, as a wife, and she bore him Aaron and Moshe. The years of Amram's life were 137 years, etc. So the commentaries say, why here, for the first time, does it give the lineage of Moshe? The first time when it mentions Moshe's birth, it just says that a person from the tribe of Levi married the daughter of Levi. So, and now it gives the whole lineage, not just of Moshe and Aaron, but it starts from Reuven, Shimon, Levi. So our sages say that it was trying to give an explanation. Why is it that Aaron and Moshe are the ones that were sent to be the redeemers of the Jewish people? So it starts with the oldest, and the oldest of the tribes, that was Reuven. Reuven was the firstborn, and it goes through his families to make a statement. There was nobody from those families who were up to the task. Then into Shimon, the next born. And in Shimon's families, the descendants of Shimon, there was nobody who was appropriate for this task of redeeming the Jewish people. Finally, it gets to Levi, and even from the sons of Levi, very good, that's Alan. Finally, from even among the sons of Levi, there was Gershon, Kasim, Merari, and among the sons of Gershon, there was nobody who was appropriate. Until we get to Kahas, until Amram, Moshe, and Aaron, we found the people who were the right ones to do the job. Okay, so in verse 28, on page 323, it was on the day that Hashem spoke to Moshe in the land of Egypt. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, I am Hashem, speak to Paro, king of Egypt, everything that I speak to you. Moshe said before Hashem, behold, I have sealed lips. How shall Paro heed me? He sent Aaron along with him to speak for him. So on page 325, verse 6, Moshe and Aaron did as Hashem commanded them, so they did. Moshe was 80 years old and Aaron was 83 years old when they spoke to Paro. That's yeah, they were old. So the commentaries asked that why is it important? The Ramban asked, why is it relevant how old they were when they spoke to Paro? He was 80, he was 83.
This Paro may have been younger than both of them.
Maybe, or older.
A generation or more.
Yes. But the Rabbi Shimon Schwab says, though, that remember the story of Moshe's birth and upbringing, that Moshe was born during a time that the Egyptians were commanded that every boy that's born should be thrown in the river. And Paro, if Moshe was 80, Paro could do the math and see, hey, he was born during the time of that decree. Aaron was born 3 years earlier. That was during the time where the decree was that that Paro went to the midwives and told them that any boy who's born, abort them. And who was being born, they should abort them and tell the mothers that they were stillborn. So this was a statement to Paro. They say, look, you or your predecessor, whoever it may be, made decrees to have the boys killed. And we're from that time, and we're standing before you just to make a statement as to that Paro does not have unlimited power. Okay, in verse 8 on page 325, Hashem said to Moshe and Aaron, saying, when Paro speaks to you, saying, provide a wonder for yourself, you shall say to Aaron, take your staff and cast it down before Paro, it will become a snake. They did that. And in verse 11, Paro too summoned his wise men and sorcerers, and they too, the necromancers of Egypt, did so with their incantations. Each one cast down his staff, and they became snakes, and the staff of Aaron swallowed their staffs. The heart of Paro was strong, and he did not heed them as Hashem had spoken. And we see that throughout the Parsha, really, especially in the first few plagues, Paro had his sorcerers try to imitate what Moshe was doing. And there's a dispute among the commentaries, the early medieval commentaries, as to the nature of these magicians of Paro. The Rambam is really alone among the commentaries as saying that they really did not have any kind of power. And this was all sleight of hand. It wasn't real, what the Egyptian magicians were doing. And whereas Moshe was it really became a snake, whereas the Egyptians were able to make it look like they threw down a snake. They threw it on the staff. You see the guy have a magic wand, and he goes like this, and like he's holding a bouquet of flowers. That they don't know magic. They have sleight of hand. They have some kind of, they distract you, and they have different contraptions, gadgets that make that happen. Whereas that's the Rambam's approach. All the other commentaries disagree, and they bring proofs from the Gemara to the Talmud that there was something to the magic that they had in those days. And they understand that it's kind of like a mashal that I could come up with for this would be, it's like a person could go to the store, and the owner of the store has a system set up that there are these prices. These are the prices that you pay, and you can't take the stuff without paying these prices. But technically, a person could go to a cashier, slip him a 20, and say, "Hey, can you please give me a 10% discount and everything," which might come out to $50. And nobody would be the wiser if they don't have a good system for that. Or nobody may be the wiser because even though the system that the owner of the store made involves having a cashier to take care of the sales. And they might short circuit that process because of whatever incentive they have, though they're not allowed to. And that's what this magic is, that the same way that the physical world has a system that we understand, that we have lights that come from the sun or from stars or from light bulbs that work with electricity and whatever else they work with these days. So LEDs, diodes. So what's that? Is LED or light emitting diodes? Yeah.
Right.
So, but technically, if God wanted us to have light, we would just have light without anything. But Hashem made a system, like we said, that we live within the natural world. We know what to expect. We could be comfortable in that. And the spiritual world is built the same way. So we could understand it, that it's also built with there's a system and a hierarchy that instead of just Hashem says, this is the way it is, that's the way it is, it goes through different layers of reality. And a person could short circuit that by paying off the cashier in a sense, going through the messenger instead of working within the system. And that's what this necromancy, this magic is. That's how the Ramban seems to understand it. Okay. So moving on, so Paro didn't listen to him and the commentaries say that Paro mocked Moshe. He's saying like, that you're coming with this like magical demonstration, but you're in the magical kingdom now. You're like, why are you coming? He's saying like you're a spice merchant and coming to the source of all the spices. That's senseless. That usually when you're a spice merchant, what do? You go to the source, you buy it, and then distribute it elsewhere. You're coming to where it all is, where you're a magician coming to where all the magic is. And to that, Moshe answered, it's just the opposite. He's saying when someone has something really, really, really good, let's say with diamonds, that, like if someone has a diamond, you don't go to the source of diamonds, the opposite. You go out there and sell it where diamonds are less found. But if you have a really, really, really good diamond, someone out there won't understand that. They won't appreciate it. If you have a really good one, you go to the experts. You go to the real connoisseurs. You go to where diamonds are found, where they're plentiful, so they can see, wow, that's a diamond. And so Moshe was saying that what I have isn't like your magic. It's completely different. So it begins verse 14. On page 327, Hashem said to Moshe, Paro's heart is stubborn. He refuses to send the people. Go to Paro in the morning. Behold, he goes out to the water, and you shall stand opposite him at the river's bank. See, Ellen remembers from previous years. And the staff that was turned into a snake you shall take in your hand. And you strike the river, and the water in Egypt will turn to blood. So the Malbim, the Klayakar, they both comment that the plagues, there are 10 plagues. The first 9 of them can be grouped into groups of 3. And he says that each of those 3 have a separate message. The last one, the death of the firstborn, were to get the Jews out of Egypt. That was completely different. But the first of each group of each group of 3 had its own unique message. The first of each group of 3, though, Moshe met Paro at the Nile. Why did he meet him at the Nile? So as Alan was realizing, it's because the Medrash says that Paro declared himself a god.
Right.
And if you look in the Haftarah describes Paro as the serpent who's swimming in the Nile that says, I am the Nile and mine is the Nile, I have made myself. meaning Paro declared himself as the God, the creator of the world. So one of the ways that he showed himself his what's the word, his deitiveness, that he was a deity,
to address
is
biological
yes,
issues.
that nobody ever saw him relieve himself.
That's right.
And so that and Moshe met him. So Hashem told Moshe, go to him early in the morning, you'll find him by the Nile. That's when, like early in the morning, he would go relieve himself. So when nobody was watching.
Of course, there's even up until today, the monarchs of different countries have to have very good bladder control.
Yeah, I mean, you got to sit there for a long time.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's not like you can sneak out. Everybody knows when you leave.
No, you wear the
Yeah.
pins out.
Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so the river turned into blood. There was blood throughout all the water in Egypt turned into blood. All the fish died. The Medrash says that they were able to buy water from the Jews. That's how they were able to get water, because the Jews' water didn't turn into blood. But one verse that I wanted to make a point of is in verse 17. So says Hashem, through this you shall know that I am Hashem. Behold, with this staff that is my hand, strike the waters and they'll turn to blood. He said, with this you will know that I am Hashem. That's the message of the first three plagues, that you'll know, or really the first two, that you'll know that I am Hashem. And the message really was that both of them were involved the river. The first one, the river turned to blood. The second one, the Nile River, these frogs came out of the Nile River and really took over Egypt.
Mhm.
And both of those, the punishment was coming from the river because the Egyptians worshipped the Nile. That was the source of their blessing and their sustenance, because in Egypt it didn't really rain. Just every year there was the high season where the Nile River overflowed, and that brought fertility to the land and watered the land. And that's how everything grew. So, and they worshiped the Nile. So it was through the Nile, the second plague as well. And the third plague in every cycle, the Klayakar and the Malbims, they were straight up punishments. There was no warning for them. It was just a punishment for not listening to the first two. Okay, so that was the first plague. The second plague was frogs on page 329, verse 26. Hashem said to Moshe, come to Paro and say to him, so says Hashem, send out my people that they may serve me, but if you refuse to send out, behold, I shall strike your entire boundary with frogs. The river will swarm with frogs. They shall ascend and come into your palace, in your bedrooms, in your bed, to the house of your servants, into your people. Which they just say that when they were sleeping, they would crawl into their mouths and down their throats. Thank you, Alan. You and all your people and all your servants will the frogs ascend. So there's a medrash that says, where is it? I don't see it here. But there's a medrash that says that it was actually one frog that came out of the river, and after that one frog came up, so then the other there's a medrash that says that the Egyptians
was the leader.
Well, they're different midrashim. There's one midrash that says that it was one gigantic frog that came out, and the Egyptians would hit it with a stick, and then it would like spit out more frogs, smaller frogs, and they just kept on hitting it, and they wouldn't stop. And the medrash was illustrating how when people get angry, people just act without thinking, and no matter what the consequences are, how much they're hurting themselves. When people are angry, they completely lose control, and they just continue to hurting themselves. And that's what this medrash is illustrating, that they just hit the frog, even though every time they hit it, it would spit out more frogs, and that's what was bothering them. Okay, and it made noise. It was croaking all day and night.
I know that would.
And if you've ever been in the woods at night, all right, you hear all this noise in the woods. I've read that like 90% of that is frogs. And you can imagine that's a normal frog, not with the plague going on. So it's a tremendous racket.
I remember at a time we had a very strong northeaster combined with a high tide. You had all those dunes built up. The water would splash over the sea. And then all night long.
Yep.
Just go camping in the Everglades.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, a Florida person here. Okay. Okay, so nonstop noise, right? So on page, and that's once again natural frogs, not like a plague where it's infesting the entire country.
Yeah,
So now on page
places where they don't customarily go like into hot ovens.
Right, they said they would climb into their bread, that they would get in their food, and they would even climb in their mouths as they were sleeping, down their throat. They would choke on it. So in verse 5, Moshe said to Paro, page 331, glorify yourself over me, for when should I entreat for you? And your servants, Paro, came to Moshe asking him to get rid of them. So he said, glorify, test me. He said, when should I ask that the frogs will leave? Only in the river shall they remain. And verse 6, and he said, for tomorrow. Meaning Paro didn't say, get rid of them now, because Paro wanted to test Moshe, and he said that Moshe must have come because he knew that this is when the frogs were going to leave. So that's why he offered. So instead of saying now, I'll say tomorrow, and if they leave now, he'll be proven a fraud. And in fact, the next day, tomorrow, that's when they left. And it states in verse 9 that Hashem carried out the words of Moshe, and the frogs died from the houses, from the courtyards, from the fields. They piled up into heaps and heaps, and the land stank. They just had dead frogs all over.
They needed a deep.
Yes, they did. Paro saw that there had been a relief, and this is the only place that it says that there had been a relief, meaning it's not that the plague was gone because there was this remnant of the plague, that they had these frog carcasses all over the place, and it stank, but still he kept making himself stubborn. He did not heed them as Hashem had spoken. Okay, and next in verse 12, Hashem said to Moshe, say to Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the land. It shall become lice throughout the land of Egypt. And like we said, the third one of each cycle, this is the third one of the first three. There was no warning. It was just a punishment, and they had lice. And here, in verse 14, it says, the sorcerers did the same with their incantations to draw forth the lice, but they could not. The commentaries say that they couldn't, something so small, it says like smaller than a lentil or a bean, they weren't able to have any control over. And the lice infestation was on man and beast. The sorcerers, the power, it is the finger of Hashem. So at this point, the Egyptian sorcerers recognized that this isn't magic, this is from God. But Paro's heart was strong; he didn't heed them. Next, the fourth, there was a wild beast, and as we said, this is the first of the second three. And in verse 16, Hashem said to Moshe, "Rise early in the morning and station yourself before Paro." Again, it's early in the morning when Paro was out at the Nile, going to the bed, and behold, he goes out to the water, relieving himself. And then in verse 17, on page 333, for if you do not send out my people, behold, I shall incite against you your servants, your people, and your houses, a swarm of wild beasts, and the houses of Egypt shall be filled with the swarm, and even the ground upon which they are. And on that day I shall set apart the land of Goshen, upon which my people stands, that there should be no storm there, so that you will know that I am Hashem in the midst of the land. And this was the message of the second cycle of three plagues, and that is so that you should know. The first one is you should know I am Hashem. This one is so that you should know I am Hashem in the midst of the land. And not only is God the creator of the world, but Hashem's intimately involved in the details of what happens in the world. That I'm in the midst of the land. And that is, in what way is this showing? Because I shall make a distinction between my people and your people. Tomorrow the sun will come about. That these wild animals, and the second plague was the animals dying. There was a plague that the animals died, and it was only the Egyptians' animals, and only the Egyptians were afflicted with wild beasts. But in the Jewish areas, they didn't come. They just stopped at the border, showing that Hashem's intimately involved in where they go, what goes on in the world. So that's the fourth plague. Then they had a conversation again. Paro said that I'll let them go, and then he refused. And then on page 335, the fifth plague was the epidemic of the animals. And Moshe warned him the livestock are going to die. And that's what happened. And in verse 6, Hashem carried out this word the next day, and all the livestock of Egypt died, and of the livestock of the children of Israel, not one died. And Paro sent, and behold, of the livestock of Israel, not even one had died, yet Paro's heart was stubborn, he didn't listen. The sixth plague was boils. Once again, this is the third one of the cycle, so there's no warning, it's just a punishment. So Hashem said to Moshe and Aaron, take for yourself handfuls of furnace soot, and let Moshe hurl it heavenward before Paro's eyes. It will become dust over the entire land of Egypt. and it will become boils erupting into blisters on man and beast throughout the land of Egypt. That's what they did. And in verse 11, the necromancers, these sorcerers, could not stand before Moshe because the boils were on the necromancers and on all of Egypt. They couldn't help themselves. Okay, now in 13, now we have the first one of the next cycle. Hashem spoke to Moshe, "Rise early in the morning and station yourself before Paro and say to him, so said Hashem, the God of the Hebrews, send out my people that they may serve me." And again, it's arise early in the morning, once again when Paro's at denial and in denial. For at this time I shall send all my plagues against your heart upon your servants and your people, so that you shall know that there's none like me in all the world. And that's the message of the third cycle, the seventh, eighth, and ninth plagues, so that you shall know that there's none like me in all the world, where the hail and the locust is showing complete control over the elements and even contradictory elements. With the hail, that our sages say that there was fire and water all mixed together, it was ice and fire all together. So in verse 17, you still tread upon my people not to send them out. Behold, at this time tomorrow I shall rain a very heavy hail, such as there has never been in Egypt from the day it was founded until now, and send gathering your livestock and everything you have in the field, because anything out in the field is going to die. And they didn't listen, and etc. And there was hail, and it struck everything. So in verse 25, on the bottom of 337, the hail struck in the entire land of Egypt. Everything that was in the field, from man to beast, all the grass of the field, the hail struck, and every tree of the field it smashed. Only the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, there was no hail. And then in verse 27, Paro sent and summoned Moshe and Aaron and said to them, "This time I have sinned. Hashem is the righteous one, I and my people are the wicked ones."
A long time to convince them.
He convinced him, but now he's convinced, right? So he says, "I'll send them out."
I'm not convinced he's convinced.
Okay, very good. And
We know better.
yeah. And in verse 29, Moshe said to him, "When I leave the city, I shall spread out my hands to Hashem. The thunder will cease and the hail will no longer be, so that you will know that the earth is Hashem's. And as for you and your servants, I know that you are not yet afraid of Hashem God. The flax and the barley were struck, for the barley was ripe and the flax was in its stalk. And the wheat and the spelt were not struck, for they ripen later," meaning that hail will destroy something that has some substance to it, something that's solid. It hits and it'll break. But the grain, the food that was close to ripening in the trees, they were destroyed by the hail. But the unripe produce, like the wheat and barley, which were not ready yet, they were not ripe yet, so they were soft. So they got hit and they just bend. They say they bend, they don't break. So they were still alive. So he's saying, "I know you're not going to listen, because you still have something to eat." So Moshe went out from Paro, from the city, and stretched out his hands to Hashem. The thunder and hail ceased, and the rain did not reach the earth. Paro saw that the rain, the hail, and the thunder ceased, and he continued to sin, and he made his heart stubborn, he and his servants. Paro's heart became strong, and he did not send out the children of Israel as Hashem had spoken through Moshe. Okay, so the Haftarah is on page 1149, just very briefly. That pasuk, page 1149, it begins talking about how when we're gathered in, when we're redeemed by Hashem, so we'll dwell securely and serenely in the land. And then in chapter 29, once again, page 1149, the Haftarah for Va'eira, chapter 29, it's the second paragraph in the English. "In the 10th year, in the 10th month of the 12th of the month, the word of Hashem came to me, saying," this is the prophet Yecheskel, Ezekiel. He said, "Son of man, set your face against Paro, king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and against all Egypt." That the Jewish kings wanted to make an alliance with Egypt against Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel. And Yecheskel said, "Thus says my Lord Hashem Elohim, behold, I am against you, Paro, king of Egypt, the great sea monster that crouches within his rivers, who has said, mine is the river and I have made myself," referring to Paro, that he claimed as himself as a deity, comparing him to a serpent living in the river. "Now I shall attach hooks to your cheeks, and I have caused the fish of the rivers to cleave to your scales. And I shall draw you out within your rivers, and all the fish of the rivers shall cleave to your scales, and I shall cast you into the wilderness, you and all the fish of your rivers upon the face of the field. You shall fall, and you'll die and be eaten by the beasts of the field." Meaning that anyone who attaches themselves to Paro will suffer his fate. So it's saying that don't make an alliance with Paro. It's just going to end badly. You'll be taken down when he gets taken down. Okay, and in verse 6, yeah, it is a long one. So in verse 6, it states, then all who dwell in Egypt shall know that I am Hashem, because they were like a reed-like support for the house of Israel. That Egypt was a support like a reed. What's the metaphor? In verse 7 on page 1150, when they grasp you in their palm, you will be snapped and you will pierce at their every shoulder. And when they lean upon you, it will be broken, will force all their liens to stand straight. A reed is something that's brittle. And when it breaks, it gets very sharp. It has a very sharp point. So if you lean against a reed, it might feel like it might support your weight, but it'll snap and it'll go right into the shoulder. Saying that was Egypt, that they felt that they could make an alliance with Egypt, and Egypt will save them from Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. He was saying that Egypt will just bring misery, that relying on Egypt will just bring misery, and you should just rely on Hashem. Shkoyach, everybody have a great Shabbos.